Hello. Okay. Hello. Good morning. Can everyone hear me? Yeah? No? No? Hello? Hello? No, but I think there's a problem at the back. Hello? 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 Yeah? Okay. Okay. If you can't, just come one row in front. Okay, good morning everyone and welcome, and I hope the JNU bus is here. So before we begin, one housekeeping matter. I think that given the fact of people wanting to leave on Saturday afternoon, I think several of you have said you wanted to leave. So what we're going to do is stop the course, on Saturday. So instead of having 2 sessions on Saturday, we'll have 1 session in the morning, and then those of you who have to leave can leave. Those of you who want to sightsee and visit Delhi, who've come from afar, you can do that as well. So, so you will be rid of my team and me earlier than you'd thought. So that's good news for all of you. Now today, I think there are no other housekeeping matters. We are, I've slightly changed this presentation from what you have here. You'll get the, it's not drastic. There's some changes, but you'll get the revised printed version in the afternoon. But for now, you can follow it here and then make changes as necessary. So we're going to do this now, and then we're going to talk about the state of the states in the afternoon. Let's begin. So we're going to talk about subsidies and universal basic income. They're obviously related in ways that will become evident as we go through the module. When we talk about subsidies, I think that I don't want to go into this in any great detail here, but basically I think all of you, I'm sure, will teach in basic micro, what the incidence and the deadweight losses, the benefits associated with taxes and subsidies are. So just that subsidy will, if you give a subsidy that shifts the supply curve, it'll benefit both producers and consumers. But we know that the fiscal cost will exceed the benefits, and so we know that there's this triangle like this, which is the deadweight loss from a subsidy, and that I take the students will know this beforehand. But I think in this I would begin teaching this with a broader macro perspective. Given that in India subsidies are quite big, and I'm going to tell you that even the fertilizer subsidy, which we'll do in some detail, is actually a macro issue. So there has to be a basic macro perspective on subsidies, especially in the context of all these farm loan waivers, et cetera, et cetera. I think the basic point needs to be brought across is that, yes, the subsidy will benefit some, but there is no free lunch in this business. There is a cost to someone else in society from this, from a macro perspective. Hello? Hello? I think you can you hear me? Oh, you can. Okay, fine. Okay. So I think this is a point that you should bring across. First thing is that so there are 3 ways of kind of dealing with subsidies from a macro level, right? One, if the fiscal deficit is unchanged, then we know that some other spending will have to decline, or some other taxes will have to go up, which will hurt someone. So in maintaining a subsidy, you are imposing costs on someone else if the fiscal deficit remains unchanged. If the fiscal deficit increases and is financed by printing money, we know that there will be inflationary consequences, and that will in turn impact on whoever, but also, as we saw earlier, inflation disproportionately affects the poor because they can't hedge themselves, they don't have assets to hedge themselves against, so someone else will be hurt. Third, Of course, you could increase the fiscal deficit and you can finance it by increased borrowing. But then, of course, all you're doing is transferring the cost to future generations, because in the future, taxes will have to go up to pay for the extra borrowing that the governments do today, or either extra taxes or reduced spending in the future. So a subsidy is profoundly a distributional issue. The notion that, when you give it to someone, it's free for them, or when you take it away from them, that you're actually penalizing only one group, is not correct. I think that's a basic macro point you have to get across, I think, in the classroom. And I think, I do think that failure to, it's not so much maybe the failure to understand, but I think some of that, but also a kind of refusal to recognize this, does affect policies. When we think about, let's say, taking away some subsidy, we think, oh my God, the government is being very bad to one group. But we know that, when you do that, there will be some benefit to some other group. Similarly, when you give a subsidy to someone, you're going to hurt someone else. That subsidies are a distributional issue. No free lunch is something I think that you have to get across in the classroom. So let's see what happens in India today. This is a kind of one way of presenting what the major central government budgetary subsidies are. Today, the biggest subsidy is the food subsidy. The second biggest subsidy is the petroleum subsidy. Fertilizer. Fertilizer is the second biggest, and then the others. But remember, these are major central government budgetary subsidies. In addition, you could have government's implicit subsidies, i.e., for example, by giving taxes at concessional rates, that's an implicit subsidy, which also governments can provide off-balance sheet subsidies, for example, to the banks, and that's not captured in this. Similarly, not just the state governments, but not just the central government, but state governments provide subsidies. Power, water are all very good examples. So when we talk about, when you look at the central government budget and look at the numbers, that kind of is not a complete picture of the total subsidies that are provided by the government. Now, if you want a truly comprehensive picture, you have to do a lot of detailed and very careful calculations. In the first survey that we did in 2015-16, we computed that was something like 4.2% of GDP. There's a table in that survey which you should look at. But I think even that is neither up-to-date nor comprehensive. I think NIPFP did a study some time ago, which they're updating, in which I think the numbers are much bigger. Central and state government subsidies are considerably larger. But so that's something that, again, you might want to familiarize your students with. The fact of what is a subsidy, what are the major central government subsidies, but also what is not captured in the central government budget alone. If you look at it, the interesting thing, of course, is that if you look at the time pattern of what happened to these three major subsidies, the big change, of course, is that the oil subsidy was the largest subsidy at a time when oil prices peaked. The food subsidy was lower, but then with the implementation of the NFSA, it's been ramped up, and the fertilizer subsidy has been kind of flat. So there's a dot there. This is in absolute numbers on the left-hand side, as a percentage of GDP on the right-hand side. I always like to look at it more as a share of GDP, and what you find the same pattern. So that red dot actually is, in all these subsidies, you should look at not just what the headline number is, but also there are arrears on these subsidies. So the actual magnitudes could be considerably bigger. In the case of the fertilizer subsidy, you see that including arrears, it's about 0.7, 0.8% of GDP, and so it's quite substantial. Now think about so why are we choosing today, or why have I chosen to focus on the fertilizer subsidy? Partly because in my first year here, we did spend a lot of time on this, trying to, provide inputs into policy making. But so we've done a lot of work which we want to share with you, and in turn you could share with the students. But also because it's funny that when you go to most countries and you say you want to do macroeconomics, the fertilizer is never something that is becomes a macroeconomic issue. But in the Indian case, fertilizers are a macroeconomic issue because of the magnitude. 0.8% of GDP is a lot. I mean, if you kind of use that for some other program, or reduce the deficit, reduce the debt, it could have major macro complications. So fertilizers are a very, are really in India, are a macroeconomic fiscal issue, but also because I think that you get, what's interesting about fertilizer is it shows kind of Indian policy making ingenuity and brilliance. How can you come up with such a massively complicated subsidy structure? So it tells you the Indian mind to some extent, and also the manner in which it's implemented, I think, highlights a number of very, very rich lessons in economics. So I think it's really for me, fertilizer, when you think about fertilizer, my juices start flowing, because I think it's such an interesting, but also it makes you wonder why we have such a scheme in the first place. One important difference between the fertilizer subsidy and the food, petroleum, and kerosene subsidies in India is that the fertilizer subsidy is not capped. In the case of urea, or indeed any other, the other fertilizers, any farmer can go and get any amount of money at the subsidized rate, any amount of fertilizer. In the case of food, as we know, it's capped. In the case of kerosene, it's capped. And in the case of LPG also, I think it's 12 cylinders. So in that sense, the fertilizer is quite interesting. It's an uncapped, kind of unlimited, you can get as much as you want at a subsidized price. There are no limits on the fertilizer subsidy. So the first thing about to note about subsidies, okay, let me start with this. There are three kinds of, actually there are three major products in India, three fertilizer products. They're called N, P, and K. Basically, it's urea, DAP, and MOP. Don't worry about all the details. But urea, we subsidize at about 206%. What we do is, in the case of urea, we fix the price that the farmer can buy it at. So the farmer price is fixed at about 53.60. That's for urea. But for the other subsidies, which are phosphorus and potassium based, we now give a per unit subsidy. The manner in which it's calculated is based on the underlying nutrients. That's why it's called the NBS, the nutrient-based subsidy. But essentially, in the case of urea, the farmer price is fixed. And so if world prices change or costs change, the burden of extra or lower subsidy goes to the government. In the case of the other two things, the subsidy rate is fixed. So if there are changes in prices, the farmer has to bear the kind of, either if prices go up, he will have to pay more. If prices come down, he will have to pay less. But with urea, it's the other way around. If prices go up, the government ends up spending more. Prices come down, the government ends up spending less. So one is a fixed price, and the other is a fixed subsidy. And so these have different consequences in terms of what happens, who bears the burden when underlying costs and prices change. What you find is that we favor urea a lot in India, and you can see that urea is subsidized at 206%, whereas the other two are subsidized at about 50-60%. So we really, really favor the use of urea through our subsidy. And of course, the expenditure also, you can see, is 2.5 times on urea as it is on the other two combined. This is for, I think, 15-16 or 16-17, one of the two, latest. It's the latest we have. So what are the consequences of this? I've told you this. In fact, this is something you may want to show your students about the analytics of this. What happens with urea? What happens with this? This is my favorite cordon diagram. World prices go up. In the case of urea, prices go up. In that case, it's the subsidy. Prices go up, subsidy remains the same. Okay, so the first, I mean, it's interesting that, when we talk about, prices in the case, one thing you find with this is that farmers respond to subsidies and prices very, very quickly and perceptibly. You can see it in the data. So the blue line here is the ratio of use of urea to K is potash, which is MOP, and the green line is the ratio of N to P. Again, so see how amazing this is. So when P and K prices are decontrolled so that they go up, the urea consumption goes up, i.e. the consumption of the substitute product goes up. Similarly, when the subsidy comes down, the use of these two come down, increase all the way here. And again, when the NBS policy was instituted, the prices went up again, so the use of urea went up and the use of P and K came down. So don't let anyone tell you that farmers don't respond to prices. Farmers respond to prices. Prices matter, subsidies determine, prices and subsidies do determine input use, output behavior by farmers, and you can see that very clearly in the data here. So I don't want to, part of the reason why I got interested in this is urea, for example. We're going to focus on urea now. So we have three kinds of fertilizers. We have different subsidy regimes. Now I want to focus a bit on urea. Essentially, as I said, what happens is that we set the farmer price. And then what we do is we provide a subsidy to all the domestic producers. And I'm going to come to this. It's one of the most crazy things that we do. And we also subsidize imports. So, for example, if demand is 10, domestic producers produce 7, imports are 3. We subsidize the 7 and we subsidize the 3. But then over and above, and the subsidy on imports is also pretty kind of interventionist. And in addition, of course, what we do is that we don't allow free imports of urea. Urea has to be imported by 3 agencies, 2 public sector, 1 private sector, and so it's called canalization. If you were to tell someone that in 2017, 25 years after we liberalized the economy, that we still have monopoly or quasi-monopoly imports of a product like fertilizer, people would think you're, when did we leave the socialist Raj behind? I think we haven't done that, and we still, we don't have free imports of fertilizers. Now, finally, we also, regulate if fertilizer is produced in point A, which fertilizer will go from A to B, how it will go, etc., etc., is also regulated. So this is a highly regulated sector, a highly regulated product, and hence it creates a lot of distortions. And we want to see what these distortions are. The first is something that we didn't see, is that the ideal ratio for urea and the other two is 4:2:1. Because urea prices are subsidized to the extent of 200+%, we see that the India average ratio, the ideal ratio is 4:2. It's almost double that all over India. But if you look at Punjab, it's like off the charts. So this is a chart, in fact, of the distortion in the relative use of the urea and the potash subsidy. You see, for example, I want you to look at the scale. The first one is drawn on a reasonable scale, but then we can't fit in Rajasthan, Haryana, Punjab on the same scale because the distortion is not in, it's like Latin American inflation rates, 3,000%, 4,000%. So that's the kind of distortion we get in urea. And therefore, what's been happening, and we'll do this to some extent in the agriculture section, soil quality has I mean, deteriorated, and it's created health hazards. There is something called a cancer train that goes from Muktsar district in Punjab. I don't know where it goes to, but cancer rates there 136, whereas I think the national average is something like 80 per 1 lakh population. So, I mean, so the consequence of subsidizing urea is very clear, both in terms of soil quality and in terms now also of health. So this is the first big distortion from the kind of things we do in the fertilizer sector.
The NPK ratio 4 to 1 is for all India. And in Rajasthan's case, there is a K already in the soil, so we can't have 4 to 1 for them. So I mean, we need to have state-specific.
Yeah. So I think there are state-specific. Yeah.
I guess it is 4 to 1 taken for all, and then
yeah.
we have calculated the distance.
Yeah, I guess we have to do this all India level, and we could, I mean, you could do it stateless.
State-specific NPK ratio, what should be the ideal one, and from that we should calculate the distance.
I can safely say that in Punjab, it will not be 61.7 to, yeah. No, but the point is well taken. I think this is something that maybe there is a state-specific calculation of this as well, and we should look into that. Yeah, that's certainly, because soil quality varies, you know, etc. So I think that would.
K distortion 45-100% will not remain there because Rajasthan soil has already K.
Yeah, but if it has, but I think this is, you know, I think it shows that even allowing for that, it's horrible. I think. Anyway, so this is the first distortion that comes from this. The other interesting thing, and this is what I want to focus on, is that in last year's survey, we had a whole chapter on this, and we said that there are 3 kinds of leakages of the fertilizer subsidy. And by leakage, we mean that, in a sense, whatever is not going to the deserving small farmer is kind of one definition of what the leakage is. Now, remember that essentially what you've done is that in the case of urea and these other, especially urea, you violate the law of one product, one price. You don't have one product, one price, because you get the subsidy only for agricultural uses, and also because, you know, in India there's a price, and in neighboring countries there's another price. So immediately you can see that when you violate the law of one product, one price, then you will have scope for leakage immediately. So there are 2 kinds of leakages that happen. Some of it is diverted to industrial uses. But that's one leakage which, you know, when the Prime Minister came in, he had, you know, he instituted this neem coating of urea. And I think this is something that seems to have had quite a big impact in terms of reducing, at least, it's had an impact, it seems to have, both in diversion to industrial uses, but also in terms of the absolute level of consumption. If you look at the latest consumption data, which I think you should analyze, something very interesting is going on, which we don't know entirely. Is it because of neem coating? Is it because of, you know, less diversion? I think these are very interesting things to explore, which we should. Now, what is the evidence for this about the leakage? So there is data. I think this is the cost of cultivation survey 2012-13, which we analyzed in the survey. So this is the percent of farmers, this is 2012-13, saying they pay above MRP for urea. And what you find is that almost everyone is paying above MRP, so there's a black market in urea. But what you find really interesting is that in Assam, Bihar, Orissa, West Bengal, certainly West Bengal, Bihar and Assam, they are bordering states. They border Bangladesh and or Nepal. And you find that because of that, there's a lot of leakage taking place outside the country, and therefore there's less availability to the farmer. And you can see clearly, therefore, the farmer ends up paying a price for this, which is that he pays, well, in a sense it's a price, in a sense it's not a price, but at least in terms of official government policy, he's supposed to get it at 53.50 per ton, but he gets it at much more because of this distortion where, you know, there's a black market that's created and it goes to. So it's really interesting how in the border states you get actually you can see the leakage to the border states in the data. Now comes, I think, this is for me the most ingenious thing that we do. So what happens is that there are, so at the moment, 30 producers of urea, and there are going to be 7 more, 37 producers of urea. Each of them, each company will get a subsidy based on what it says is its cost of production. And if a company says, my cost is 10, you get 1. If it says it's 20, it gets more. So the more inefficient you are, the more the subsidy that you get in the case of urea. And I think this is, why we do this, why we continue doing this is something that simply, beats me. It's something, I mean, it would be so easy, for example, to say that, look, okay, we will subsidize domestic producers, but we will give everyone a uniform subsidy, so those who can, we're giving you protection, we'll give you some protection, we'll give you some subsidy, but say 10, 15%. But beyond that, if you can't produce, you can't produce. But that's not what we do. The funny thing is that if you look at this, so this is the graph which shows the subsidy per metric ton as a actual cost, and you see, and this is by definition. So you get a perfectly fit line, which you never do in statistics, because by construction you give the more the cost, the more the subsidy. Now, the funny thing is that we don't do subsidization in this because there's some big employment benefit in this. In the case of fertilizer, most of the input costs are basically energy. So this is a chart which shows how many employees in each of the plants, and this is the cost of production, and this line is the international price. So essentially what you know is that all those blue dots above that red line, all these dots are inefficient producers because they're producing well above some semblance of imported price, and they don't even employ very many people. You can see they employ 500, 400, 300, 200. So this is not like we're providing employment for thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people, but this is a very energy intensive industry, and yet we do. So this is leakage number 1, as I said, goes across the border and or industrial uses. Leakage number 2 to inefficient producers, and the more inefficient you are, the more the leakage to that person. And the third thing we find is that how much goes to rich farmers as opposed to big farmers as opposed to small farmers. So in that we calculated that out of 100 rupees that's spent, 9 is lost to inefficient firms, 36% is lost to some combination of industrial uses and leaking abroad. 22% actually goes, 22 paise goes to the big farmers, and only finally about 1/3 goes to the small and marginal farmer. So if you're thinking about a policy that should benefit the poor, in this case the poor farmer, then in terms of the effectiveness of targeting, we're not doing a very good job. And over and above that, because of this, we've created inefficient farms, we've created a deterioration in soil quality, and we are creating health hazards. So the fertilizer subsidy is kind of a good example of a place where we should be thinking about more carefully. We should be doing, thinking about, whether we can rationalize the system. And, we can do all kinds of things. For example, you can eliminate just the producer inefficiency. Yeah, sorry, yeah, question?
What is the threshold limit of the land holding for the...
Yeah, so small and marginal will be less than, it's less than 1.5 or 2, 1.5 or 2 hectares. It should be there in the presentation. Large farmers are greater than 5. So in fact, there are 5 categories: so small and marginal, medium, and large. Yeah. Oh, can I just finish and then we take questions on fertilizers? So this is a sector that's crying out for reform, where you can see all the costs associated, and the magnitudes are big. It's 0.8% of GDP if you include the arrears, and you could do all kinds of things. You could rationalize prices. And of course, now what we've done, the government has done, in the last budget, the finance minister announced that we would start DBT, direct benefit transfers. There are, I think, 16 pilot districts where this experiment has started. It's going to be reviewed, and depending upon that, it's going to be extended. But so this is a case where something like a DBT offers the potential to address the leakage, address to try and begin rationalizing the sector. But this is a sector that it kind of makes you wonder, why we have this policy. And of course, I will come back to this in the last session about the difficulties we have in India on exit. To get out of misguided policies in India is proving very difficult, and I think the fertilizer sector is a great example of that. Yeah, questions?
Actually, so far as urea subsidy is concerned for the agriculture farmer, I'm actually concerned with the irrigated land. Actually, it is very skewed in India. So when you have, basically my question is pointed, is there any kind of rationalization being done regarding distribution of urea or subsidies regarding that with regard to irrigated land, so that it is a clear justice to the farmers who are not getting even other benefits as well.
So is your question that the more irrigated the land, the less subsidy you should get? Is that what you're, yeah?
Actually, somehow it is justified to get.
Yeah. You see, this is what is, you've kind of asked a very good question, but also a question where, we want to, when you think about, how do we do this, yours goes in the direction of more complication. Then you say, okay, I have urea, but then I will find out where it's irrigated and where it's not irrigated. And so in terms of implementation, that gets very difficult to do. So in principle, so when we come to the UBI section, this is precisely the kind of, we want to think, oh, there's some ideal beneficiary, we have to get it only to him and not to someone else. And we devise all kinds of schemes to try and do that. But it ends up leading to misallocation and leakages and so on. So simplicity, I think, is probably the way to go. But certainly the point that you want to use fertilizer policy to neutralize income distribution, which I think gets very complicated. Yeah, question. Yeah, question. You had a question. Yeah, you had a question. Yeah, please. The mic, please.
Yeah, sir.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Is that any kind of productive subsidies and non-productive subsidies? Because my question is that a southern state providing to the public subsidized price meals. So how it comes under its productive or non-productive subsidies? So what is your opinion about that particular states providing subsidized price meals to the public?
You want me to talk about the Amma canteens, really? Amma canteen, I'll talk about that. I'll come to the Amma canteen, yeah. See, essentially, I did not talk about the food subsidy, right? It's a variation on the same thing. See, I think that, as I said, subsidies benefit some and not others. I think that there could be, good social reasons for doing that. But I think the important thing is that we must do a cost-benefit analysis. We get some benefit, but we pay a cost. And this cost-benefit analysis we should do constantly. And, as we go through this, you'll see what, I don't want to flesh out the explanation in greater detail, because as we go through this, you will see what the benefits and costs are of doing something like the Amma canteen. But, actually remember, this whole midday meal scheme, I don't know whether it began with the Tamil politician or the Andhra politician. Was it N.T. Rama Rao or MGR who first started the midday meal scheme? Kamaraj started. Okay. Then
MGR developed that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Support of your points, I want to mention here, everyone we are talking about that mid-meal school, school meals introduced by Kamaraj, MGR, is actually originated from Tamil Nadu only. 1929, Rettai Malai Srinivasan, he was the member of council in the British.
Okay,
So
good.
he actually, Rettai Malai Srinivasan, he actually introduced this scheme. But Kamaraj and MGR, they developed, they established.
So you know what this tells me? That in your classroom, you should ask someone to do a historical origin of the midday meal scheme. It would be a wonderful project. Huh? No, seriously, I would love to know about it. I really would. I'm not joking. But it's a great project. Huh?
Sir, being
One. Sorry, let her finish and then we come to you. Yeah? Mike, meanwhile, if you could get the mic here, yeah?
So when we're saying that 9% is actually lost to the inefficient firms, how are we defining this inefficiency? Is it only in terms of cost?
Yeah.
Or cost relative to?
Yeah, so it's cost relative to the international price, because that's the opportunity cost of resources, because you could either use resources to produce it domestically, or you could save those resources. And so what is the cheapest alternative source? That's the subsidy. That's how you calculate a subsidy. There's a market price and the price that you pay. In this case, the efficient cost of production is one metric would be the imported price, landed imported price. But that's a standard way of doing it. It's not a very fancy or a complicated thing at all, because that's what you want to measure it against, what the lowest cost of production would be. Yeah.
Being from a farmer family, I just want to raise this point, and that is from Haryana. Can we think about the crop-specific fertilizer subsidy? Because if you think that
all of you are, here I am trying to get away from complexity. You want to, just think of the implementation difficulties.
Yes, I'm saying it because of the reason that that there is a cancer train and all you were talking about. And
Yeah.
the major culprit for that is wheat and the rice.
Yeah.
So if we can promote the organic cultivation of these crops by giving some incentive to the farmer instead of giving them subsidy in terms of the fertilizer, it would be great help in terms of the saving on the account of the health as well as
So
if you're talking
yeah.
about the UBI,
On this, again, I am going to answer precisely this in the agriculture section. And if I don't, you come back to me. Exactly this question. Please. I see we need to move on to the, because I have to do UBI. But before that, I want to do something that the minister spoke about in the next 15-20 minutes. Please.
Okay, thank you, sir. My question is regarding the definition of farmers that we follow, because many times, while distributing in subsidies, we don't follow the census definition of farmers. All we are concerned about the land holding. So here in this whole realm, landless laborers, landless farmers are missing their opportunities here, and they are the most victimized of these cancers and other things as well. So how we can bring them in the thing there?
See, first point is that this subsidy, anyone, even a landless farmer, can go and say, give me the subsidy, give me fertilizer at the subsidized price, and he can sell it to whoever he wants. So in that sense, this doesn't discriminate whether you're small farmer or big farmer, or no farmer, exactly, or no farmer, exactly, or no farmer. But the point that you raise is a much bigger point, right? How do you, improve the livelihood and incomes of those who don't have land? And that is a question, it relates to how we should develop the agricultural sector, how we should develop the manufacturing sector, how we should get them to move, what their skills should be. And those are things we'll touch upon both in the agriculture and the manufacturing modules that we do later on. I think I'm going to move on now, unless there are, let me move on, and then maybe at the end, when we take a break, we can do this. So, the first year of the survey that I did, that my team and I did, we documented all these subsidies, and we spoke about jam and all of that. When we went around presenting this all over India, I think the question came back, why do you only document and talk about the subsidies that the poor are getting? What about the subsidies that the others are getting, the middle class and the rich? And that was a very fair critique of us. And so we said, so in the second survey we did, that is in 2016, I forget, it's 2 years ago, not the latest one, the previous one, we said, okay, let's have a go at documenting the subsidies that go to the relatively well-off. And this is what the finance minister mentioned in his speech, that this generated a nice discussion on this. So And now this is kind of a little bit like a pedagogical device that I would use for teaching students. I think when we think about a subsidy, and this kind of answers the question that you raised as well about the Amma canteen, sir. This is, it's kind of response to that as well. So one way of thinking about it is what are the benefits and what are the costs of subsidies, right? So not in a narrow sense, in a very narrow sense, and I'm going to define what that narrow sense is. So if you give a subsidy on a particular commodity, the benefit could be that how much of it is consumed by the poor, right? So the benefit, so in this, remember in all of this when we give subsidies, at the back of our mind we have some target group. The bottom 30%, bottom 40%, that you can define on your own. For the purpose of illustration here, we say that the target group is, say, the bottom 30 to 40%. And by the way, the NSSO data will allow you in your classroom to give the data to your students and say, no, let's do the same exercise if, say, my target group is 60%. And the target group is 70%, that's an exercise that you can do in your classroom based on this analysis that we do here. So we measure the benefit is, so if you're doing, say, let's say food, Amma canteen, for example, food, you say bottom 30%, how much of their expenditure goes on food? If they consume 50% of their expenditure on food, then that's a subsidy that will have, from a social welfare point of view, a lot of benefit. But if the group is only consuming 10%, maybe it will have less. So that's the benefit. But then the cost comes in is the leakage. One thing is, so if you spend 100 rupees on the Amma canteen, all the rich people, for example, in the neighborhood that I live in Chennai, there's nothing that prevents the rich people also from going and eating in Amma's canteen. So that's a leakage, because it's meant for the poor. So one way of measuring the leakage is what fraction of the total spending does not go to the target group, goes to the non-target group. And this we simply measure as total consumption of the target group versus as a share of total consumption. And one way we illustrate this is a simple benefit cost ratio. You say this is the benefit, what proportion of expenditure of those households is spent on this. The cost is how much of total consumption does that group represent as a proportion of total, because the more, so on the right hand side the cost increases, it says what fraction of total is by the non-poor, by the non-target group. So if the non-target group is consuming more of the commodity, it's a cost. If this commodity is very important to the consumption bucket of the target group, benefit, that's good. So essentially, you want to provide subsidies to items that ideally are here in this area, and you don't want to provide subsidies to items that are here. Right. So that's kind of the. So this is a kind of theoretical graphical way of doing a kind of cost-benefit analysis. So it would be nice to do it with taking Tamil Nadu data, how much of expenditure of the households is on Amma canteen, for example, and see how much is spent. So, but here's the interesting thing. The subsidy is not, we said this before, is not always the explicit. So when you give money to someone, that's a subsidy. But you can also have a subsidy which says that, for example, you are supposed to pay this tax, but I'm not charging you that tax, and that's an implicit subsidy as well. Because you're departing from some normal, so your benchmark could be the cost, or it could be the normal tax rate that you have to pay, and that's so. The higher the benefit cost ratio, the greater is the case for subsidization of the commodity. Now, we've spoken about gold, for example. It turns out, this is from the NSSO data, the top decile, the top two deciles consume 80% of the total gold share. So we know by definition that if you tax gold at anything less than the normal rate, you will be giving a huge implicit subsidy to the non-target group because they are consuming most of the gold. So this was the argument that we used in the report that I did on the GST. But remember that So in this, the comparison should be against a normal tax of 26%. Today, when the GST comes in, the normal rate would be 18. But today, the normal rate on most goods is 12.5 on excise, about 14 on VAT. So the normal tax is 26. And today, we charge about 1 to 1.6%. So the implicit subsidy on gold is that much. It's basically 2 minus 26 times the total amount consumed by the non-poor, which is a huge amount. Sorry? NSSO data. Yeah, NSSO tells you what the consumption of gold is by different groups. Yeah, sorry, question? Use the mic, please. Yeah. No, ask the question, please.
So this, when actually the bottom, like the top 2% are spending 80%.
Yeah.
Okay, the bottom one, the last one is a 10.
10, yeah.
Okay. I thought the other.
Top decile, yeah. Now, so I want to, this is a similar calculation we can do for, aviation, who really travels. We actually provide a subsidy to aviation turbine fuel because, in the case of aviation turbine fuel, the only point I would make, we know, for example, the poor don't travel by plane. But the interesting thing is that what should be the comparison point for it? Should it be, because remember, in the case of petroleum products, we charge a much higher tax, a higher normal tax because, these things create pollution, et cetera, it's bad for the environment. So these are considered demerit goods. So if you were to make the comparison something like, what is a normal charge on petroleum, which is maybe like 50, 60%, then, again, you will see that the implicit subsidy could be quite high for the rich. But I think now you can subsidize by relative on the indirect tax side. So, gold and aviation fuel are indirect taxes. They're paid by consumers in some way. But you also can give implicit subsidies in the form of foregone income tax. So if you don't pay income taxes or you get an exemption, then that is also like a subsidy. Now, here the point I want to make is a very simple point. By definition, an income tax benefits not the rich, not the very rich, not the very, very, very rich, but the very, 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 very rich, for one simple reason. Why? Because we show in the economic survey, and this is again something we did a first analysis last year, which should be updated, is that even the lowest slab of income taxpayer in our estimate lies in the top 5% of the Indian income distribution. So one of the really interesting things about India is that the middle class taxpayer thinks of himself as middle class and poor, but actually, if you're paying even the lowest tax on the income distribution, you find that you are actually very, very rich. So any income tax exemption that we give is by definition a subsidy that leaks because it doesn't go to the target group, because the target group is not even remotely close to paying taxes. It goes to the very, very rich. So we use this to calculate, for example, in the case of we have a lot of small saving schemes, i.e., post office, provident fund, it's a big one. We give these both better interest rates and we give a tax exemption. So in this case, suppose you add together the better interest rate that you get and the tax exemption that you get against what a normal return should be in a bank deposit or a government bond, we find that there's a huge subsidy to these so-called small savers, so-called middle-income class people who are actually at the very top end of the income distribution. And so what we did, so this is something that's, so just to give you again, this is again a pedagogical device. So we have a benefit cost ratio calculation. Remember, we did benefit, we did cost, divide one by the other. So you can get a benefit cost ratio. And we know that, the higher the benefit cost ratio, the lower should be the tax. So the more you go on this side, the more you should be here. So here the benefit cost ratio is high, and therefore you should have, it would justify a high subsidy, because subsidies are this side, taxes are going this side. So if you have low benefit cost, like here diesel, and broadly what we find is that, the income Indian pattern is not too far away from that. Petrol clearly, is taxed maybe more than it should be, this seems. Kerosene and LPG seem to be subsidized too much relative to the benefit cost ratio. So this is a way of just, what should be what is the benefit cost ratio? What is the effective tax rate, and what should be the desirable tax rate? You can kind of do a comparison on this, and this is one way of doing it. And of course, what we did in the survey, I told you, we put together all the subsidies to the non-target group, and as an illustrative calculation, we said 1 lakh crores, which is not, and the reason why the minister referred to this was that, this at least, the number may not be exactly right, you have to redo the calculation, but it gives you a sense of, let's just not focus just on the subsidies to the poor. We do a lot for some, the undeserving rich, and in any political discussion, I think we need to keep this in mind. And of course, all those Marxists out there. So in the first year, when the first year survey came out, the authors of the economic survey were called anti-poor. To redeem our Marxist credentials, we then did this. Now we can pretend to be both Marxists and capitalists at the same time. That's the advantage of being able to do 2-3 surveys. You can cover all your bases. And after having done this, I feel immune to all the attacks from Marxists as well. Question? Oh, now I know the Marxist attack is coming.
But it's about the benefits, and I was just wondering if instead of doing just a share of expenditure in the budget,
you can have weights. You can have weights, welfare weights.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because railways being, I see that you're doing only AC, which is
Yeah.
but there are small expenditures which are important, which would would make sense to subsidize, even if the share is not.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So remember, see, here's one, for me, a rule of thumb for me, which I follow when whatever analysis I do. It's something that I find doesn't happen enough in India. I think that when you do research and do these things, be bold in what you do, but be transparent in what you do, right? So, because what happens is people tend to be very, very cautious. Oh, I've not got the perfect data, I don't have the perfect thing, therefore I will not do anything. So in this these numbers, I know there are going to be lots of maybe assumptions that could be tweaked, data sources that could be better, but the point is you want to make a larger point. And as long as you get the data and do it, but you have to be transparent about what you do. Just the data should be available, your assumptions should be clear, but you shouldn't be cautious or almost cowardly in saying, oh, I will not go into this because of ABC. So be bold and encourage your students to be bold in the way they think and they write and they research, but they should be transparent. Okay, yeah. I'm going to choose people who haven't asked questions before. So with the mic, please. No, first question here.
This is just a clarification. What was the reason behind you choosing the target group as the bottom 60%?
Bottom. I think in the original one we did 30. In this year we updated to the bottom 40%. But
the graph says it's the bottom 60% of the population. The benefit cost ratio for the earlier graph. It says the target group is assumed as population in bottom 6 deciles, and the non-target group is the top.
The answer is there, please. So in fact we've updated to bottom 60. Yeah. So again, remember these are alternative ways. You choose your definition of target group and do it. But here we've done, in the survey when we first did it, we said the target group is the bottom 30%. But we also did robustness checks. What if we made it the bottom 60%? How much would the numbers change? So that's what I forgot to mention is that be bold, be transparent, but do robustness. Do alternative scenarios, and that's a way of doing this.
Because why I asked this was because so this is NSS 11-12, and so if we go by the poverty line, so it's about 25%, which is the poor. So if you take bottom 60%, it includes a large proportion of the non-poor as well.
Yeah. So in fact, we are stacking the odds against us, right? So if we're saying that we consider a bigger portion as a target group, despite that, if you get such high numbers, then it shows we're being very, very generous even to the so-called middle class or upper middle class or whatever it is. Yes, a question from there, please. Yeah.
Good morning, sir.
Yeah.
So my question is about the fertilizer subsidy.
Yep.
Now, such a skewed subsidy pattern, is it because we are relatively dependent on imports for phosphate and phosphorus, and we are comfortable with the domestic supply of nitrogenous fertilizers, or could there be any lobby pressures for the industry?
Lobby pressures. Remember, almost all of it's a kind of rule of political economy that any kind of intervention, distortion that you have is either started by a lobby or is being reinforced by a lobby, and so almost axiomatically that's true. But you raised one, I think, much bigger kind of question. Your first question is, and it also relates to, I guess, the question that came here. The question is that, is there some benefit from having it produced domestically rather than produced imported? And it's a very complicated question. The first answer is that you should buy from the cheapest source. Especially here, you want to favor the farmer, right? You want to favor the farmer, because if you don't, then you're going to have cost associated with that. But then if you have some reason why it's you can say there's some social benefits to producing domestically, then you get into a different kind of calculation. In the case of fertilizer, I cannot see any social benefit to producing, because even you see the employment numbers are so poor, and the only possible reason, or as it began originally, is food security. You say, fertilizer is important for food security, for food security is very important, and therefore you want to do this. So you could get into all these complicated chains of why you want to subsidize, and that's why we are where we are.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. So please speak in the mic.
Cost of production of fertilizer per unit, that is also very high, sir. And so
No. So I can tell you what the cost of, we know for all the companies, we know the data. We know the data on the cost. These are the costs. We know these are all the inefficient ones, and the ones below are the efficient ones, because that red line is the imported price. Almost virtually nobody does. So maybe you say a little bit, we give some protection, and even then you would have a question. Oh, now my familiar friends are raising themselves. But let's ask a question here, and then we'll come to the other questions. Yeah.
So see, the fertilizer sector, a lot of inefficiency has been injected through the subsidies. That is one part of the story. And the other part is that as a manufacturing sector, it has gained a lot of efficiency, especially in terms of energy use. It has become really efficient. So is it the case that the farms who are not efficient, they're actually coming from the unorganized sector? Because
no, these are all organized.
Yeah, so the ASI, for the ASI data, they are really becoming efficient. So how this paradox can be explained?
This is latest data. So they may be becoming more efficient, and they could still be very inefficient relative to world prices, to the cheap. Yeah, so that's, I think, please.
That are made about fertilizer subsidies also applicable to food subsidy, or do we make a distinction? because the nature of commodity in question is different. Poor spend a large share of their incomes into food, and also recently studies have shown that leakages have reduced in terms of food subsidies. So can we say that if leakages are indeed reduced or covered, we will have no issues with food subsidies? Or is it
yeah, very good question. I mean, how does the food versus fertilizer? I deliberately chose fertilizer over food for a reason. Food is a bit more complicated, I think. And if you don't mind, when we do the UBI, we'll get into this. But certainly, I think that, remember, there are lots of distinctions. One, food is more important for the poor. Second, it's limited. It's not an unlimited subsidy like it is for fertilizer. Third, we have an elaborate system of PDS, which, as you rightly say, in the past there were lots of leakages, but I think there has been some improvement over time, but it's still, far from having solved that problem. But also, I think that there are benefits from protecting consumers against the vagaries of prices, because remember, in the case of the NFSA, you not only guarantee some quantity, you also guarantee a price. So there are all kinds of, so it's more complicated. The net cost benefit, we should look at more carefully, but it is quite different from fertilizer. Yeah.
Yeah. In one of the chapters, you write that the taxes should be on savings like EET, exempt and taxes. So on bank savings, as of now, we are paying on both TET kind of thing, because interest is also taxable, so is savings. So if we make EET, is it for equity also? Because equity is also one form of savings where we are paying corporate income tax effectively, or at the time of dividend distribution. So TET should be, rather EET should be both bank savings and equity, or only the bank savings?
See, in terms of savings, I think the two ones that are kind of neutral are TEE and EET. So basically at some point you have to pay taxes, either when you put it in or when you take it out. The corporate tax thing, in principle that the returns, after tax returns to all forms of financial instruments must be equalized. Right? So in that sense, I think we should have a system that does that. But in the case of equity, the calculation gets more complicated because, first there's the corporate profit, there's the withholding, and then, there's the dividend distribution, and then, so it gets a little bit more complicated in terms of how, but the principle is that, after tax returns should be equalized and the tax system should not distort that in any way.
So EET should be for equity as well?
A version of that.
Politically tough,
but yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because also in the case of equity, there's this whole question of, double taxation versus single taxation of equity, and it gets much more complicated. Yeah.
Sir, related to subsidy, can it be possible that through a strong financial architecture and market perfection, we can simply, in a phased and calibrated manner, remove the subsidy in totality?
At this point, we take a break because that's what we're going to talk about when we're going to talk about universal basic income, and that's exactly what we're going to get into. So at this point, let's take a break. It's 11:05. Let's meet at 11:25. Yeah, sharp.
From Qatar and all those Middle East countries where